I want to dig into how far Notion has to go in order to, let's say take out HubSpot or meaningfully compete with them, across the surface area.
Right.
But zooming out, we started this episode by talking about how it's difficult to predict what's going to happen in the near term with AI, and maybe a little bit easier to predict, what's going to happen in the long term. Not that we have a crystal ball, but I want to talk about why we believe that Notion has a chance in the near term to be a major player. So I'm going to give you the Eric Dodd's quick hot take on why this is possible and what it explains about sort of near-term and long-term market dynamics. So there is a tried and true playbook that has generally been true for most business models for a long period of time, maybe since the beginning of time, which is find a very specific problem for a very specific person, company, etc., and solve that problem better than anyone else. As your starting point, if you're starting something new, how do you get traction? You solve a very specific problem for a very specific person and try to do that better than anyone else. And I think that there are many reasons for that, but at least two major ones are it creates differentiation.
Right.
And it gives you pricing leverage. So a modern example of this might be something, I'll give you two modern examples. One is linear, right? Project tracking tools are a dime a dozen, right?
Yeah, there are many.
And linear went for some extremely specific pain points for power users who were sick of Jira, and that's really, and they just started taking over, right? And so, of course, it's possible and even likely that they expand the surface area of their product. But a good example of how they have really stayed the course is like their document, the document piece of their product is still very, very primitive, right? It's not even close to Confluence. You couldn't really make that comparison, right? Now, what's interesting is that the barrier of entry to creating software is dramatically falling, which means that we will have way more software and there will be downward pricing pressure, right? So supply is increasing and the cost of software will decrease, right? In aggregate. We can, I would say like enterprise security concerns are probably like a separate conversation.
Sure.
So that's one example. Granola is actually another really interesting example where, there were tools like Otter AI and other transcription tools that have been around for a long time. And Granola executed against the main pain points around just ease of use, access to the stuff, running things locally on your computer. It was just, and for a very specific group of people, right? Those sort of knowledge workers on Zoom calls all day who were having trouble taking notes, whatever, right? Okay. So what's interesting is that is going to get more and more and more and more competitive. So if that ends up being true, then who are the big winners in the near term? My hypothesis is that it is the Notions of the world who will have a dramatic advantage in how magical AI feels because of the connected ecosystem. And the quick example there would be, before you tear this apart, which please do, is that for a long time, it's been really painful to try to connect different pieces of software, even from the same vendor that you use every day, right? So I have a calendar, I have email, a lot of that runs in the Google ecosystem, or the Microsoft ecosystem. And they're kind of connected, but not in a way that's not in a way that feels like magic, right? But in a system, and that would be true of HubSpot as well. mean, if you think about, HubSpot's Gmail integration, I haven't used it in a long time, but my guess is that it still largely operates like it did before, where you essentially BCC a HubSpot email address and you get the email into the system, but it's so janky, right? I mean, no one likes to operate like that. So now imagine a world where with Notion, you have your CRM as a database in Notion. You have all of your company documentation, right? Internal docs, everything.
Yep.
Customer intelligence, etc. Notion's transcription service is extremely good, for, recording calls.
Right.
And it's actually connected, right? It is legitimately connected, so you get an email from a customer, or a calendar invite, that has email addresses in it, and that can be connected with the entire system. And that is that is what AI needs today in order to feel like magic, because if an agent is going to execute some process where I get an email from a customer and that needs to trigger a workflow that evaluates, is this a support issue? Is this a whatever? And an agent needs to execute, a complex workflow. It needs context from all these other places in order to make the right decision as it sort of autonomously works its way through the steps. And that's going to be very hard for HubSpot to execute, in large part because of their legacy architecture. But I think it's a huge opportunity for Notion, and I'm sure there are other companies. So, but what say you?
So I think in favor of Notion, the core primitives seem good in that there are not many other tools where the core primitive is like text files.
Yes.
Pages. I guess they call them pages, but they're just text files.
Right.
And then you can have like a database and a text
or essentially it could be, you can export to Markdown, whatever they're doing under the hood.
Right.
It's a much, much shorter path to like a text file or machine readable information.
Yes. Right. Yeah. Yeah. So I think that's a huge positive for them. There's not many other people that have that form factor. And I looked up some numbers for us.
Oh, yes. Okay, I'm ready.
I have a graph. Let's see if I can share this. I used Perplexity here for fun to generate a graph on the funding and suspected revenue. So I don't think all of these numbers some of these numbers are conjecture, but
it was a non-deterministic methodology.
Yeah. It was a here, I'll share it. All right, can you see that?
Yes.
So essentially what it did is it searched the internet, read a bunch of articles, and tried to graph its best guess at revenue growth versus funding for Notion.
Okay. And so for those of you who are listening to the episode, we have a timeline on the x-axis and then amount in US dollars on the y-axis, and two lines, one revenue and one funding. And John's going to describe them.
So 2019, 2020, we've got a little less than 100 million raised, and revenue is not much. Then 2022, revenue's headed toward 100 million. 2023, so between 2022 and 2023, it looks like revenue just had this massive jump, and they're on this like crazy upward trajectory. So
yeah, it's the hockey stick that gets venture capitalists excited.
Exactly. So you still have a major. So then there's a big funding round in 21, and they raised. So they're I think the cumulative raise is $345 million in 2021, but then you see this nice curve of revenue. 2022, just under 100 million. 2023, 250 million. 2024, 400 million. 2025, 600 million, and haven't raised any more money. So
this is incredible.
So it's a pretty incredible growth curve. It's stated somewhere when I was doing the research for this, I think it's for their this is funny. It decided to do a bar chart. I was like, what are you doing? Do a line chart.
You're so disgusted with that as a data person.
I am. But yeah, so here's an interesting piece from September 2025. The leadership noted they have more cash on the balance sheet than roughly the $330 to $340 million raised. Fall of 2025. Wow. So they're in a really strong position because part of my, sometimes these things get so overvalued. It's like, I don't even know if they're going to like execute. They're going to have to sell. They're going to have to IPO. I don't know.
Right. That's a lot of money raised, but with that amount of revenue, and let's just make the assumption that the cap table is managed well.
Right.
They're in an unbelievably strong position in this market.
Yeah. And then I think the current valuation is like 11 billion or something like that.
Wow.
So in a really good position. Okay. So those are all things in favor of original form factor, the integrations, acquisitions, or like the other thought is like you could say you wanted to add email marketing, you could build it yourself. That's still like difficult. You could essentially find one of these developer tools, like think about what Stripe used to be for finance. There's several of them now that does all the hard parts for you.
Right.
And you basically just white label.
Yep. It's just an API.
Email and
so SendGrid,
SendGrid's a good example. And you can get that up. You could probably get a product out in 30 days if you did that. Right. And they could do that or they could buy somebody. So I think they have a lot of options to really expand and cover.
And capital to
and the money.
To do it.
Yeah, right.
Yep.
A lot of options to cover pretty much the ground they would need to be an alternative for HubSpot.
Yep.
Here's, I think, the negative for any company, even Notion, is what do you do when the reality is your form factor is not the right one anymore? And this could potentially happen for every single current software startup. Because, for example, like what if the right form factor is let your agent decide how it wants to store stuff, and you just say like, and it just decides, and maybe mark down pages like Notion is not its best solution, and then you have some startup that decides to do that, and everything just performs great, because and then if your core form factor is broken, like what do you do, right? Because that would be the thing, right? Like pages are nice for humans, like they work / text files, but at some point it might be that that's not the right thing, and if that's not the right thing, that is kind of core to your platform, and the human tendency would be to like force that to be the right thing.
Totally. Okay, I have a couple thoughts on that. What's interesting about Notion to me, and why I'm clearly bullish on, I don't know if they're going to take my advice, as they steer their $600 million a year juggernaut. But what's interesting to me is that under the hood, everything is a database entry. It's a very short path to text files, I agree, because it's sort of a document-based form factor. But because of that, and because there's a lot of flexibility in even the databases that you can create, I think that is insulation. I think that is some level of insulation from the type of disruption that you're talking about.
Okay.
Because an agent can create a database structure. We're depending on how deep you go into their actual database system, right? Mm-hmm. But if we think about this for like small business, mid-market, the level of complexity is not super high. And so I think an agent on top of a flexible database system can really do most of what needs to be done. And I don't think that will be like dramatically disrupted in the near term, at least by a startup.
Yeah. So here's another way to think about it. I think they're really well positioned against HubSpot, but I guess the other question is that how easy would it be for a hyperscaler to just eat them both? Because essentially, like if there's some, I'm thinking about the OpenClaw, whatever it's called now, Moltbot, like the concept of the AI employee, right? If that really actually does work, like who has all the hardware? Like the three main hyperscalers. And then how hard is it for them to like make a thing that can work like Notion? Like super easy. Or it doesn't even have to work like Notion. It just has to be like roughly equivalent.
Right.
And then they already have all of the like, think about AWS. I mean, they have like a million different like modular things that takes a lot of development effort today to do stuff with. But if there was an option to like, hey, I run an agent and like check all the boxes for the thing you need it to do, it seems like those guys are in the best position. Here. But I don't know.
Well, okay, jumping back to something that you said before, if we think about the gaps that Notion would need to overcome, and I'm sure we're not thinking about all these because I haven't looked at HubSpot's product surface area.
Yeah, and they're growing their surface area too.
Right,
they have
right.
An
And they're integrating, AI, all that sort of stuff. So, the automation is a huge one. Website builder, I think, is a big one too. But I think that's very easily solved by using one of the provider APIs. So, for example, V0's API, you just bake that under the hood, and you do website generation, as part of your product suite. I think that would be very quick to build out, and probably actually more accurate because Notion would give the agent so much more context about your business, right? And that sort of extends in interesting ways. As a quick side note, if you think about, okay, I want to do a customer testimonial or a case study or whatever, I mean, you could get very, very far on generating a customer case study page if it's being generated essentially out of your CRM, has access to emails, call transcriptions, like all that sort of stuff, right? So I think that's a little bit of the magic that I'm sort of speaking towards is those types of things are actually not a huge deal for Notion to do.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
So marketing automation, website builder, the analytics piece is really interesting. But at the same time, they're in such a strong position, financially that, again,
they can buy or build.
Exactly. They can buy or build, right? But one of the like hyperscalers, there are a couple things that come to mind when I think about the hyperscalers taking out both HubSpot and Notion.
We're talking Google, Microsoft, Amazon, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
which for selling Cloudflare, pretty well positioned too.
Right. So it's such a different business though. Like, Google's the main incumbent because so many businesses operate off of G Suite, and they have you have your document management and Drive, right? Yeah, especially for SMB. But Notion, I think, this is going to sound ironic based on Google's because Google's like market penetration is gigantic. But if Notion can solve those problems, they have a pretty big distribution moat.
Yeah.
Right.
And people like it.
And people like it.
That's a big deal.
They're a startup, but at 600 million, they're a force as a company.
Yeah.
Still small compared to Google, but people like it. It's so much better than the Google Workspace suite.
It is.
And
which has been roughly the same for like a decade.
Exactly. Right. And so Google, I don't think we should discount Google's ability to sort of respond to a red alert and, start making OpenAI shaking their boots. But at the same time, the great sort of user experience that Notion provides is not Google's core competency. Like that is not what they do really well as a company, right? Yeah. And so I do think Notion I think you said it well, people like to use it, right? And they have a gigantic user base, and I think that is somewhat of a moat. I think that's somewhat of a moat for them, especially as AI becomes more cost effective and they can distribute that magical experience
Right.
to, to more and more people. So I don't know. I mean, it's so interesting to think about, like, will Notion try to do that,
Right.
as opposed to staying in the lane of like Google Drive, sort of document management type stuff.
Right. Yeah. I think the biggest barrier for any company that was founded pre the last couple of years,
Mm-hmm.
especially that is now big, like if the form factor needs to change, are you going to do it? Right.
Yep. Yeah.
And I don't know, because there's a component where, here's the downside of Notion. So I'm part of a lot of Notion workspaces right now. They get really messy.
Yep.
And I think, can you get AI to like keep them straight? Can you make the AI search experience actually good? I think the answer is probably yes.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
But especially if it's a team, like a team setting, which is the point here, it's like, how do you actually like keep the knowledge consolidated? Because that's a really hard problem. Because people duplicate things, people don't search before they start a new thing. Like and I guess my point here is to solve that problem, you would have to force everybody through agents to do everything to really solve that problem well. And then if you're doing that anyways, who cares how it's, you know what I mean?
I do, although I think I disagree. I think I disagree on this being a problem, because in the SMB mid-market space, messiness in Notion as a single system is way better than what most people are experiencing now.
Yeah,
because at least
true.
if you search, you can find stuff faster.
Yeah, and surely there will be buttons to like, or pop-ups that are like, hey, it looks
Right.
like there's a duplicate. You want me to fix it?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So I constantly remind myself of that, where I think you and I tend to operate on a little bit more the bleeding edge, where we're,
Right.
doing advanced stuff with agents, and, we've sort of straddled this world where, Notion's like really messy, but we're seeing the power of AI, and it's like, okay, maybe that's actually a solved problem.
Right.
And then we're using these tools in a more advanced way than I think the average user. And so I constantly have to remind myself,
Right.
like, oh, well, actually, this is better. Like, I am annoyed with being a part of a bunch of Notion workspaces that are messy.
Right.
But being in a messy Notion workspace where everything is together is better than the current state for people who
Right.
aren't,
Right.
Yeah,
I would agree with that. One other counterpoint to Notion, and this would be more about growth for them, regardless of the AI stuff, for SMB specifically.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, how many of those people, like, I think there's a lot of SMBs that they don't have any sort of like organization other than email, basically.
Yeah.
Or email and maybe some kind of chat app.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of them can get pretty far with that. So I think some of those people won't like the form factor. And I think there's an eventual cap in the people that want to sit down and write. So there may be this other form factor where you've got email and maybe chat, and then there's this other form factor out there that works for people that, like, they don't really want to sit down and write. They don't want to manage things this way.
Yeah.
They'd rather like talk to a thing.
Yeah.
Or they'd rather delegate to a, AI thing to, I don't know.
Yeah.
I think that's an interesting one. There might be a max of people that want to work this way.
Totally. But that's input mechanism.
Yeah. Which they could evolve that, right?
Right.
Which,
I mean, they kind of already have that with the
a
transcriptions,
start.
which is really interesting.
Yeah. Meetings is the start to that.
I think the other interesting thing is that, two additional quick thoughts, one of them more specific, one more general. I think one of the things that could emerge if Notion follows this path is templates that are primarily permission based. So if you think about a CRM, the problem is you don't want someone to be able to go in and just make a bunch of changes and screw it up.
Sure.
And so really you're talking about like a sort of a permissions, like who actually has the ability to edit this,
Right.
or make changes or, all that sort of stuff. And so I think you can almost imagine like a CRM, sidebar nav item in Notion that has some of those baked in, but it's really just a Notion database under the hood. It just has like a more opinionated layer of permissioning on top. So that's one thing. The other thing that I think is really interesting, which we've talked about before, is the cost of running agents. And one of the things that has prohibited advance in the user experiences that are possible where AI will just do things for you is that's very expensive, right?
Yeah.
And so
Yep.
doing that across your whole user base could be prohibitively expensive, right? And so the value actually has to be there. But when you think about things like cleanup, if it gets to the point where there's enough margin for Notion in the SMB mid-market space, you could just have agents like running cleanup,
All the time.
all the time.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so and that actually in and of itself would be magical.
Right.
How do you charge for that? How,
Right.
do people see the value? Like, I don't know, those are all like very difficult questions, but
Yeah.
that is certainly like that would be a huge advantage for, especially in the SMB mid-market space.
All right. Here's one more hot take on this topic.
All right.
I think one of the big factors that's completely out of Notion's control that will impact their success is how far ahead will the frontier models be of open source models? Like, because right now, I think we're kind of at like a 3 or 6 month lag time. If that kind of stays pretty consistent, I think Notion's got a real shot because they can run models for really cheap and do all sorts of neat things.
Yep.
If there's a bigger gap or for some reason some kind of like feature parity problem where like the frontier ones can do a couple really useful things like way better, then there might be a financial problem for them where it's like, cool, this thing is, what is the pricing now? It's like $100 to accomplish this really good task.
Yep.
And then that 100, like you can't just absorb that forever. And then if you go direct with one of the frontier models, they're like, oh, for you, if you go direct, it's $2. I mean, it's way cheaper, right? And we've seen that already with Claude and how they're limiting their API in certain ways. They're not letting people use it outside of kind of their ecosystem in certain scenarios, or it's really expensive to use outside of ecosystem. So I think that's worth thinking about. And then the second factor is if there's not more than like a 3 to 6 months gap, there's so many billions of dollars deployed inside these frontier models. Do they just go really hard after a ton of different app form factors, realizing that like, realizing that that's the play to spend the money on, and then that's just going to be a problem for a lot of people.
Yeah,
I think if they decide to do that,
for sure. All right. Well, we will see how this plays out. And I think after this conversation, one of my biggest questions is if you have a revenue growth curve like they have at 600 million and cooking, do you rock the boat?
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly.
But we shall see. All right. Well, thanks for joining us for another episode, and we will catch you on the next one.